There we go. Okay. So our lecture by Dr. Ernest Barthélemy is being sponsored by the ICU Critical Care Diversity Council. And we are thrilled to have Dr. Barthélemy here and willing to talk with us about his experiences. As we move through the lecture, if you have anything you'd like to ask, chat, share, you know how to use that chat button. Otherwise, if you're not speaking, please stay on mute. And with that, I'd like to hand this off to Lawrence to introduce Dr. Barthélemy. Lawrence, you're muted.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So Dr. Ernest Barthélemy is a neurosurgeon, and he is currently our neurotrauma and health equity fellow at the UCSF here at Zuckerberg San Francisco General. He's a Haitian American and a native of New York City, and he completed his medical education at the Mount Sinai Icahn School of Medicine. Following that, he was a global surgery research fellow at Harvard University. I think that's in the suburbs of Boston, where he completed an MPH with concentrations of global health, public health leadership at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He's the founding president of the Society of Haitian Neuroscientists, which is a growing community in the Haitian diaspora, an organization with over 80 members spanning the globe that aims to advance neurological care, mental health care in all Haitian communities. And he sits on the Global Health Task Force of the International League Against Anti-Epilepsy and the 2021-2023 co-chair of Young Neurosurgeons Forum at the World Federation of Neurological Societies. I'd add to that, he's one of 4 neurosurgeons who practice in Haiti, one of whom is the president of that country. But, you know, doctors with sterling academic credentials grow like onions in these parts. And what's really important about Ernest Barthélemy is he's a man of a fearless man. And because he's a fearless man, he's a man of great compassion. And his compassion engaged me some months ago in a conversation on race and many members of the ICU. And from that spawned our desire to have him speak to a larger audience. You know, I was reflecting on this, and the work of racial equity, the work of anti-racism, is a work of both words and deeds. And our words matter. We have rightfully purged hateful words from our language. And we use sayings that are important, that Black lives do matter. But our deeds are important as well. And I think one of the most important deeds that we can do, one of the most important actions that we take in our fight against racism is listening. So I'd invite you to listen openly, with an open heart, an open mind, to what Dr. Barthélemy has to say to us, because it's a rare opportunity. And with that, I'd like to give you Dr. Barthélemy.
Thank you so much, Lawrence and Christina, for both a generous introduction and the invitation to give this talk. Let me share my screen first and make sure that that's working okay, and then I'll continue. So yeah, that worked, and then I will screen share. Okay, great. This is a very existential talk. I don't often give talks quite like this, so it's a little bit experimental, and I'm very happy to do it. You know, particularly in celebration of Black History Month with many friends. Okay, so I have no disclosures here. So in the way of outline,
no glasses for some reason. Said no glasses. For some reason I can't. Oops.
Okay, thank you. So in the way of outline, you know, you have the outline here. I've told that whenever you do a talk, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them that thing, and then tell them what you've told them. So I've tried to follow that a little bit to provide some organization here. So I'll share reflections on some challenges facing our nation in the USA, if you are in that country calling in today, and our world. And then I will talk about me. And that is the part of the talk where I expect people to probably start falling asleep. Okay, and I'll go into some details about my history that a lot of people don't know. Biography of a Black man with a French name, that Lawrence pronounced beautifully, by the way. And also, I'll tell you a little bit about SHN, Global Neurosurgery Neuroscience Experiment that Lawrence alluded to. And I have some objectives for this talk. They include that you hopefully either learned something you didn't know before or that you didn't know as well as you thought you might have, that you are entertained, that you are challenged to expand beyond your comfort zone, and hopefully that you're inspired to Google, read, and or discuss or even tweet more about something in this talk or something that comes up for you as a result of this talk. And the last thing I'll say as I get started is I'll leave you with some questions here. And given limited time and a lot I want to get through in rather limited time, we may not have a chance to discuss these questions. However, my intention with virtually all of these questions is really to leave you with the question and not necessarily to strongly suggest an answer. Sometimes I find that even if we are 100% certain about the answer to a question or nearly certain about the answer, there's often so much more to learn from sort of being in the space of the question rather than asserting or being convinced of the answer. Okay. So with that, I'll start with a quote by W.E.B. Du Bois, another Black man with a French name. Either America will destroy ignorance or ignorance will destroy the United States. So all people suffer. Suffering is a human condition, and it is a slippery slope to start suggesting that one group of people is suffering more than another. Generally, however, most human beings are able to readily acknowledge that there are certain and unique brands of suffering that are particular to certain groups of people, like pandemics, Holocaust, famine, slavery, genocide, terrorism, war, racism, hate crime, and poverty, and the like. Okay. And yet, if we give ourselves permission to look beyond the lies, deceptions, and pretenses of historically rooted injustice, we may discover a rare opportunity to liberate ourselves from the shackles of dehumanizing traditions and create a planet where each and every member of our species enjoys a more fully human existence. These are some thoughts that came to me this morning around 2 o'clock in the morning when I could not sleep anymore thinking about this talk. So there we are. And one question is, what do I mean by lies, deceptions, and pretenses? And I leave you with that question. I think it's an important question, especially in the context that I've provided to you. So here's one area to bring that prism of analysis to. What is the principal, historical, factual foundation of capitalism? Okay, and I do authentically mean this as a question, not to suggest a specific answer. Even if I will invite you to consider another question as a possible answer, okay, that I will follow this with, but I leave this with you to think about as I invite you to consider the possibility that it could be the systematic extraction of wealth and resources from Africa and Asia. Okay, and that we could certainly have a whole conference just about this question. Those of you who are familiar with certain principles in economics know certainly that one of the difficulties that health economists run into in the healthcare space in trying to apply classical economic theories and traditions to healthcare are the many market failures in healthcare. Okay, and what do we mean by that? It's sort of facts about healthcare that don't fit classical models of economics. So for instance, in healthcare, there are high barriers to entry. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, to become a physician, for instance, certainly a neurosurgeon, takes a lot of money and privilege and health and opportunity. And there certainly is certain heritage and legacy that facilitates one's ability to pursue neurosurgery or become a physician or frankly, any of the healthcare professions. And conversely, someone who has a lack or dearth of money, privilege, health, opportunity, heritage, legacy may find it more difficult to enter the market of healthcare, if you will. Certainly at the same level as those who do have access or are not stopped by those barriers. Another failure in the healthcare market is asymmetric information. So the vast majority of patients do not have access to the same amount of information as healthcare professionals. And so that sort of presents a dilemma for applying free market economic theories to healthcare. And then monopolistic behavior, which again, we could go on and on about. What do I mean by this? Well, I will leave you with the question. What does it look like, or what does a healthcare system or hospital look like where one's values, the institution's values, are primarily driven by a profit motive, as opposed to, or in contradistinction from, let's say, education or health equity, making sure that the people with the least privilege have the best health care outcomes. Do those equations look the same? Is it a real win-win scenario when profit motive is the goal? And what do the extremes of institutions that sort of fit this profit motive, prioritizing value system look like? Okay, so that's another question. And behind all of this, and I've already suggested it, what is the nature of the relationship between market failures in healthcare and the overwhelming evidence of structural racism in healthcare? And I expect the vast majority of people attending this conference to be somewhere in the healthcare spectrum. So you are familiar with PubMed most likely, or hopefully, you can also Google these things. But if you have any question in your mind about what the evidence is for structural racism in healthcare, in our current era, more of it will be coming out, but I assure you, the literature, the scientific and biomedical literature is replete with examples of this over and over and over and over and over again. And so you can prove this to yourself pretty easily. Okay, so with that, let's go to a moment about 246 years ago, when some very courageous and audacious and brilliant men from Europe said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The emphasis here is my own, okay? But this is verbatim from the document, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. And they continue. And to navigate my Zoom here, there we go. They continue, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. So when these words that constitute our, oh, I just got a text, Lawrence. Would you mind sending this link to Floyd Trammell? Thank you. Okay. while these words were written, before and after, actually, before, during, and after the time when these words were written and sort of set the blueprint, if you will, for the United States of America, this was happening. So every single dot on this image is a slave ship. It is a slave ship that contains people from sub-Saharan Africa captured, loaded onto the ship against their own will, and brought to the other side of the world for the most part, although several did go to Europe as well, to provide forced and free labor to drive the massive development of the foundation of wealth for what we call today the United States of America, and certainly any high income country in this sphere, and even in this hemisphere, and then even in colonial Western Europe. And as you can see, although this particular animation doesn't go past the early 1700s, but you see the graph at the bottom that we're talking about a period of several hundred years on the scope of centuries until frighteningly recently. And the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery was Brazil in 1888. Okay, so you can learn more about this on this website, slavevoyages.org. And how many people are we talking about here? Well, we have records of at least 12 million of them. And many scholars in this space estimate that the number is somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 million human lives. Okay, and so now the question today, the question that really makes this as sort of frighteningly relevant as it is the question of whether Black lives matter yet. Okay, do Black lives matter yet? That's another question that I leave you with. Okay, and a nod to one of the things we're struggling with here in the United States is the recent revival of an inquiry into the assassination of an NAACP official in 1967 that was never really fully and properly investigated until the current time. Okay. And then we have a US president, who says something like this. Okay. One of the really interesting things for me as a Haitian American who was born in the United States, and I'll get into that a little later, of two Haitian immigrant parents, is this was said actually on the eve of the 9th anniversary, celebrating or commemorating, I should say, the terrible earthquake in Haiti, the destructive earthquake in Haiti in 2010. That was on January 12th, 2010. So that's a piece of the narrative that probably doesn't often get remembered when we recall the shame that I think most, if not all, Americans suffered when our head of state said this. And in fact, at this time, I was in Haiti. When he said it, I was in Haiti leading a meeting of the revived Haitian Foundation for the Development of Neurology and of Neurosurgery. We called ourselves la FADNEC, Fondation Haïtienne pour le Développement de la Neurologie et de la Neurochirurgie. And I am pictured here with several people, most of whom are not neurosurgeons, but there is only one neurosurgeon in Haiti who's actually not in this picture. So almost all of them were there. And I'm standing next to the person who was then elected the new president. So the former president of La FADNEC was Alix Elie, who's now a retired neurosurgeon in Haiti. And then Dr. Ariel Henry, a good friend and colleague, was elected the president of that foundation. And that's before he left practice to become the current prime minister of Haiti, which is a job I do not envy at all. But he's not clinically operating anymore. So if you're talking about neurosurgery in Haiti, who you have left practicing, Alix Elie is not practicing, Patrick Valsin is practicing. Yudi Lafortune is someone I have called The Future of Neurosurgery in Haiti. So he is there along with Patrick Valcin, and then Bernard Pierre, who is not there, is not. And while I am very grateful to Lawrence for calling me one of them, I'm not there nearly enough as I'd like to be. Hopefully, as I move into my career, I'll find ways to engage there more. So right now there are 3 active neurosurgeons carrying the burden. And we were all in this meeting actually when President Trump said what he said, and we all reacted in the ways that we did to it. And while it was shameful and unfortunate, it wasn't surprising. It wasn't that surprising because, you know, about a century prior to that, another US official had similar things to say. And this was documented by John Allen, an inside view of revolutions in Haiti, 1930. And it was in reference to the 41st US Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan. And as he says here, you can see in front of you, if you see weird movements with my mouse, it's just maneuvering around Zoom, sorry about that. So Mr. Bryan, Secretary of State, said, Mr. Allen, I want you to tell me everything there is about Haiti. We are very much interested in Haiti. Tell me about the country and who the people are. Anyway, where is Haiti? And Allen says, I described its geographical position, briefly outlining its history, stating that there were mostly descendants of African slaves, that they were mostly descendants of African slaves with a leaning toward French ideas and customs, and that French was the language spoken. And Mr. Bryan exclaimed, dear me, think of it. And that is what he said. So, you know, when you contextualize the comments of the former US president, in some respects, he was simply reviving a very long tradition of US policy and posture towards Haiti. You know, this US Secretary of State certainly was not the first person to speak of Haiti in these terms. You know, perhaps we'll have a chance to get into that as I transition into the next moment of this. Sorry if this virtual background is making me look invisible. It's because my scrubs are green. Okay. In any case, it makes me look kind of mystical here. All right. So the most important thing to remember is this: to be ready at any moment to give up what you are for what you might become. Again, by W.E.B. Du Bois, our other Black man with a French name here. So anyone who knows me knows that there's at least 4 things to know about me. I'm very, very serious about martial arts. In fact, I have often thought of myself as a martial artist first before anything. That's the first thing. And you know, I'll get a little bit into that, and then who I am as a dancer, who I am as a fitness professional, and you know, how all of that set up my neurosurgical career. So as a child, I was completely enamored with everything about Bruce Lee. As a matter of fact, not only as a child, to be honest with you, one of the things that I was really thrilled about coming to San Francisco was that I knew I was coming to the birthplace of Bruce Lee. He was born in San Francisco in 1940. And you know, a lot of things that I probably connected with about him. First of all, we shared an immigrant experience. We were both hyphenated Americans, is the term that that Barack Obama used in his last book. So we shared that experience. As a martial artist, I learned from him, watching his movies and reading books that he wrote, books about him, the critical importance of excellence and passion and honest self-expression on the journey towards mastery. So that was very important. I shared with him that he was a social justice warrior, and he did this very artfully. If you watch, for instance, Enter the Dragon, which he completed, and actually he died on the set of, unfortunately, of basically an anaphylaxis with a cerebral edema secondary to an unknown allergy to an NSAID that he took on the set of Enter the Dragon. But in that movie, which he completed, thankfully, just before he passed, he had African-American karate star Jim Kelly star in that with him, and crossed some color lines and broke some rules. And one of the memorable quotes from that movie, as Jim Kelly is speaking to you know, one of the other co-stars in the film, and looking upon a shanty town in South Asia, Jim Kelly says, the ghetto is the same all over the world. They stink. Very, very memorable quote. So I have a lot of love for Bruce Lee, despite that he passed before I was even born. And then, one more thing at the bottom left, a lot of people don't know that Bruce Lee was also the cha-cha champion of Hong Kong. So I didn't know that before I became a Latin dancer myself. But that turned out to be another thing that we shared. So I was fortunate enough to earn my black belt level in Southern Chinese martial art just before I started residency. And I pulled that off literally, you look at the date, 29th day of June, 2014. So this was literally 2 days before starting residency at Mount Sinai, New York City. And had I not done this, I'm not sure it would ever have gotten done. So I'm glad I put that away before I started. And I learned a lot of other things from that experience, mental toughness and discipline, etc., which both were well aligned with what my parents expected of me as their Haitian son, and certainly tools that were useful to me in neurosurgery. This dance career was born out of interesting roots because it's actually an injury. So injuries triggered some of my major transitions in life. I injured my shoulder before college, and my orthopedic surgeon said I couldn't practice martial arts or lift weights or do anything else. So I had to find another hobby. And so I found salsa dancing. I had always wanted to learn to salsa dance, and I completely fell in love with salsa dancing. But it took on a life of its own when I connected so strongly with it. I got curious about what was going on in this Afro-Cuban musical form. And I properly discovered myself in it. I made salsa my undergraduate major at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study of New York University. So I got to travel to Cuba for the first time in 2005 during my undergraduate work, trying to understand the history of salsa. And things shifted for me when I realized that both of the fundamental musical forms and related dance forms in salsa dancing have their roots in Haiti. And I didn't know this. I discovered that Afro-Cuban rhythms and jazz, which are commonly cited the two ingredients of salsa. You take Afro-Cuban rhythms, you take jazz music, you put them together, and some combination of those two creates salsa music. And I found out that the Afro-Cuban rhythms we're talking about specifically were not from just anywhere in Cuba. They were from the eastern region of Cuba, the Oriente region, where during the Haitian Revolution, many French and Haitian expatriates and slaves were actually brought into the eastern region of Cuba. Haitian Creole is actually the second most widely spoken language in Cuba after Spanish. It's a huge Haitian population there. And the Haitian folkloric rhythms are actually the foundational rhythms for salsa dancing and salsa music. So I learned that at the Centro de la Investigación del Desarrollo de la Música Cubana, which is the CIDMAC, I think they call it. That's the Center for the Development, Investigation and Development of Cuban Music, and in Havana. And that's on the Cuban side. And then on the jazz side, I discovered that the African roots everyone talks about in American jazz were actually Afro-Caribbean roots. These were Haitians in New Orleans, Louisiana, providing the backbone of that musical form, which was also thoroughly fascinating. So I really discovered myself here. I could do a whole talk about the 5 years I spent as a dancer. I told one of the neurointensivists this morning that the reason I was able to pull out some Korean with one of our Korean patients is that my first dance performance was in Seoul, Korea. So that was a surprise to everybody. But I think the most important thing, probably for the sake of this talk about my dance career, was this was the thing that Dr. Joshua Betterson, so he's the chairman of the neurosurgery department that I graduated from at Mount Sinai. I think this was the thing that most intrigued him in my CV. Not all of the other very medicine and science stuff that I did, but the fact that I performed at Lincoln Center as a Cuban dance specialist was something that he took as a message that I valued excellence in a way that might make me a good match for neurosurgery. And so far things have worked out. So I'm really happy that my dance career served me in this way. This image on the right is Vivian Call and I were both chief residents respectively at Mount Sinai, graduating last year. She was an ENT, and I from neurosurgery, and we had figured out very early in our training that we had this shared, very, very serious connection with Latin dance. So we did a TikTok video about this if you want to look for this. Okay. However, I injured myself as a dancer, and then that sort of propelled me into another career, which I thought was as physical, but perhaps not as risky. And I became a personal trainer. But being a personal trainer, of course, I thought, well, you have to be the very best personal trainer. You can't, just go into the field and be any personal trainer. And that's, again, taking a page from what my parents insisted on in anything that I pursued. And so I thought, let me get a master's degree in exercise physiology. And I did that at Columbia University Teachers College. And I got a lot out of this. I published my first 3 peer-reviewed papers out of that experience. And I met a mentor in Dr. Ronald Demiersman, who was the chair of the department at that time, and talked me into a career in medicine. Interestingly, Dr. Ben Carson was the keynote speaker for my graduation from that program. And I will not hide how profoundly inspired I was and remain truly by his story and career as a neurosurgeon. And that's about as far as that goes. I mean, if anyone has any question about what this may or may not suggest about my politics, I put in this grainy picture at the bottom right that my wife took when she was pregnant with our daughter, just after Barack Obama was elected president. And I went out on the sidewalk of 96th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue, Manhattan, New York City, and I did cartwheels all the way down the block. I could so not control the the energy and excitement of Barack Obama's election that I did this, and she caught a picture of it with a not smartphone, so that's why the picture is so grainy. But that doesn't take away the major role that Ben Carson played in inspiring me to pursue this profession, and I did. And I graduated last year, and trying to move into the third portion of this talk from Mount Sinai here with friends and colleagues. On the left side of the screen, Dr. Hangsik Bayoun, who everyone loves operating with at our trauma center in Elmhurst, Queens. And then in the middle, I'm here with my lifelong friend and brother from another mother, Dr. Ian McNeil, who was 1 year ahead of me and actually finishing his fellowship in spine surgery at UCSF just as I was coming in to start this neurotrauma fellowship. So he and I overlapped by 1 month. It was amazing. What a perfect way to settle into San Francisco before he went on to head up a complex spine in Connecticut. And then some pictures from my time at Harvard. So, one of the World Health Assemblies, I'm pictured at the bottom here with Dr. Tedros, the Director General of WHO, and the then Health Minister of Zimbabwe, Dr. Moyo. And then at the top right, with my friend and mentor, Key Park, who heads up the neurosurgery initiative, the Global Neurosurgery Initiative at the Program in Global Surgery and Social Change at Harvard. And then we have a mutual mentee in Dr. Wilgens Lauti, who's standing to his right side there. And then the bottom, everyone knows what has happened over the past couple of years. This is a picture from a protest that many of us from Mount Sinai were involved in, where I'm holding up my sign that says Black Lives Matter. It's not brain surgery. So I put this picture of Napoleon here to remind me of a tradition that we had for graduating residents at Mount Sinai, where one of our attendings would recall the historical fact that Napoleon had never lost a battle. And the first time I was there, I had to open my mouth and say, well, actually, that's not true, because he did lose, and Napoleon's loss was critically important to my ethnic identity, and it was very important for me to make that point. So I think we don't celebrate that with quite the same story in mind. And that takes us to Haiti, and who I am as a Haitian American and as a member of the nation of Haiti, which extends beyond the borders of Haiti. Our revolutionary hero, who successfully defeated Napoleon in 1804, actually he passed away before the revolution was completed. His compatriot and colleague Jean-Jacques Dessalines actually finished the job, if you will. But it was started by Toussaint Louverture. This is Toussaint Louverture, and statue, 2 versions of statues of him. The one on the right, actually, interestingly, is in Alada, Benin, West Africa. where they commemorate this as well because he was actually one of the sons of the king of Alada. And so he is remembered across on both sides of the ocean, if you will. So this history between Toussaint Louverture and Napoleon, it's funny, I say Napoleon in English, and Napoleon, is a fascinating one. This article here commemorates a letter that Louverture sent to Napoleon, where that said at the top of the letter, "Du premier des Noirs au premier des Blancs." And what that means is from the first of the blacks to the first of the whites. That's how he started that letter. So that gives you a sense for the tenor of what was to follow. And we won't have time to go deeply into the history of Haiti, although I would love to do that. But in honor of Black History Month, I thought, well, how about sharing some of Frederick Douglass's words about Toussaint Louverture, given that he's a very critically important African-American. Every American should know well. And there are many ways to know him besides Googling. You can watch Will Smith's Netflix series 14th, about the 14th Amendment, and learn about him. But he was the US Minister Resident to Haiti in office from 1889 to 1891. And a renowned social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. And he's pictured here on the left side of your screen in his office in Haiti. And these are some words he had to say with regard to Toussaint Louverture. And I have to maneuver my Zoom so I can read this as you do. There we go. Okay, so the lesson taught by Toussaint Louverture should not be lost on the oppressors and persecutors of the Negroes of the Gulf states of our union today. There may arise other men of that race, not less brave or less fertile in resources than this hero of Santo Domingo. In the language of Thomas Jefferson, it should be remembered that the Almighty has no attribute that will take sides with the oppressor in such a contest. The world today is more sympathetic with those who rise against oppressors than when this man led the revolt against slavery in Haiti. The whole Christian world was at that time against him. England, France, Spain, Portugal, the United States, and Holland were all slaveholding. They could only look with horror upon a great Negro leading his class in rebellion for its freedom. There was neither sympathy nor justice for the Black insurgents. The moral weight of the world was against them. So those were his words regarding Toussaint Louverture. So moving on to that Black man with a French name that I have continued to cite over and over again. Okay, also a critically important African-American figure to celebrate and remember and know well this month, and who, like me, actually is of Haitian heritage. That's where the Dubois comes from. And he was the first man of color to graduate with a PhD from Harvard. And so we have that Harvard connection in common. And he wrote his dissertation on the suppression of the African slave trade to the United States. Yeah, I had the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into the life and memory of W.E.B. Du Bois at the end of my residency with the help of a dear, dear friend, colleague, and I would say world-renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Ejan Duam, who is Ghanaian American and helped me to set up a wonderful voyage to Ghana, where I discovered that W.E.B. Du Bois is buried there. I had no idea. So I visited the Du Bois Museum, and there's his grave there at the bottom left, and it is within the structure that you see on top, and some other pictures I took in and around that museum. And it was a really wonderful trip I took for several reasons, not the least of which that according to this DNA story that represents some 71% of my DNA as matching DNA from a variety of African regions. Ivory Coast and Ghana is listed as 5%. And so there was certainly a roots trip there for me, among other things. Okay. So my story is very much an immigrant story. Me being a son of Haitian immigrants. I think that's abundantly clear at this point. And what does it mean to be a Haitian, especially when, for those who are not and may not know many Haitians, your only context for Haiti is crisis after crisis, terrible things that you hear in the news, you may read in your newspaper of choice, in the media, and you don't get a real sense for it. You have that, and then you have the derogatory comments of a former American president, which following, as we said, a long, long tradition of a terrifying U.S. posture towards Haiti. Well, Haitian culture deeply values excellence, excellence academically, excellence professionally. Education is a major value. The pictures that I show here are actually pictures from an international award-winning school in Haiti called Quatre-Pressoir. And Quatre-Pressoir was founded by my father's uncle, Ernest Vaval. And my father actually named me after him because he was such an inspiration to him, and frankly, for so many Haitians who either had the opportunity to be educated at his school or just know of the school. It's a shining light for Haiti, Quatre-Pressoir. Dignity and resilience are major values. We're very family-focused, family-centered. Ancestry is critically important. Legacy is critically important. And 1804. And I would suggest that a lot of the resilience, people talk about this remarkable Haitian resilience, the ability of Haitian people to bounce back, as it were, or weather the storm of these horrifying things that happen in that country. And I would suggest that where there is authentic resilience, 1804 lives somewhere at the heart of that. The memory of becoming the first Black republic on the planet, okay, the first country to throw off the shackles of slavery, and a country that abolished slavery when the rest of a hemisphere would continue to practice slavery for the better part of a century. You can imagine how that conditions the geopolitics and what has happened in Haiti since then. But 1804 is very dear in the hearts of all Haitians, and the year that we became independent. And people have often asked me, well, why does Haiti suffer all that Haiti suffers, right? Is the country cursed? Is it a lot? Lots of theories about that, and that's obviously way outside the scope of a talk like today, where I'm already pressed for time. But I will suggest to you and offer to you that racism and colonialism is deeply at the heart of everything that you see in Haiti. And Haiti is a living, palpable example of the most extreme forms of global racism and a perpetuating colonial legacy. Okay, so when you think a country described the way that the former American president described Haiti, the terms that he used, what kind of people does that produce, right? So, it produces people like the provost of Rice University, Reginald Desroches. Let me try to maneuver my Zoom there. The provost of Rice University, people like my cousin, Dr. Reynold Viret, the president of Xavier University, produces people like my dear friend, Dr. Carole Bureau-Joseph, okay, the first Haitian-born US college president. People like Dean Henry Ford, renowned pediatric surgeon and currently the dean of the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Produces people like another dear friend, Dr. Jean-Luc Cadet, who is currently the chief of molecular neuropsychiatry at the NIH. People like Dr. Nadia Biasou, who is the chief of integrative neuroscience of communication at the NIH. People like Dr. Emeline Edwards, who's the director of the division of extramural research at the NIH. And people like Dr. Paul Valéry Joseph, who's the chief of the section of sensory science and metabolism at the NIH, and gave a brilliant talk at the University of Miami this morning. So, all of these people share in common the country that the last U.S. president was talking about. Okay. So it is easy for us to lose ourselves in details in endeavoring to grasp and comprehend the real condition of a mass of human beings. We often forget that each unit in the mass is a throbbing human soul. W.E.B. Du Bois. I think we say Du Bois in English. Okay. So I didn't get a lot into this in this talk. I maybe get, nodded, towards it, but I think the talk would be incomplete without speaking to some things that have happened in my medical career as a result of looking the way I do and being who I am. So race and ethnicity are sort of intermingled here. And I go through a list of these, but before I go through them, I'll point you to this Road to Resilience podcast that Mount Sinai produces. So you can Google this, you can find it. And there's an episode there that I share with Dr. Lynn Richardson, who is co-director of the Institute for Health Equity Research, professor of emergency medicine and population health science and policy at Mount Sinai. So, so I had the privilege of introducing her talk with some reflections of my own and some of these experiences. So you can look that up. And things that were said. So while I was a medical student, a couple of things that happened that are unforgettable. I was in a class on GI pathophysiology, and a well-meaning and very experienced, renowned gastroenterologist was teaching us about cholera. And he said that cholera in Haiti was endemic. It was endemic because in a place like Haiti that deals with everything that it deals with, you get infections in a place like that. That's a place where infections, terrible infections that take lives and cause destruction, harm people. And that was part of, in my mind, a very long tradition that started with HIV/AIDS in the 80s. So I was very uncomfortable, but had to educate the professor and my classmates that no, actually, cholera was brought to Haiti by United Nations officials. Okay, but we eventually figured that out. And I sent him some of the really remarkable molecular epidemiology work that proved definitively that, in fact, the cholera strain responsible for that epidemic had not been in Haiti prior to those relief efforts. Another episode was when I was interviewing at a neurosurgery residency program, and at a dinner. So residents will often take the applicants to a dinner to get to know them better. And one of the senior residents of this unnamed program says audibly across the table, I'm sitting across the table from him, the whole restaurant can hear this. And he says, a Black neurosurgery applicant, or no, specifically it was a Black male neurosurgery applicant. I have never seen that before. I was just dumbfounded. So that did happen. More common things that happen is, I want to speak to the doctor, please. This happened throughout my residency. I talk in the podcast about how someone came into the hospital lounge that I was in, and the first question out of this person's mouth is, "Are you housekeeping?" And I've been asked if I was respiratory therapy or an X-ray tech, or even a medical student, which in some ways I was flattered because, given all the stuff I did before medicine, as I shared, I'm a little bit older than most of my classmates. So I thought, oh, I look that young. That's great. But, sidestep the fact that this might be some form of infantilizing or something like that. Right. But very recently, I'm interviewing for jobs right now, and one of the jobs at which I interviewed, and I've been interviewing at a number of places, but I was kind of shocked about this particular episode. So often people will introduce me as Dr. Barthélemy, and I often, being a sort of a brand new neurosurgeon, just about to start my practice, I'm very comfortable with people calling me by my first name. But what was unusual about this situation is I was being introduced to someone who had never met me before, didn't know me for the next person, was about to have an interview with the CEO of the unnamed hospital where I was interviewing. And the person sort of in charge of my experience there says to this administrative assistant, "Please tell the CEO that Ernest is here." And the administrative assistant is looking at me, trying to figure out who I am. And I think maybe I suggest that it's my dance background that keeps me particularly sensitive to body language, but she really just had no idea who I was. And, and asked, where from. And I said, well, neurosurgery, not sure how to answer that. And she said, nursing, but then the the direct assistant of the CEO comes out, sees me and says, "Dr. Barthélemy," and then again, there's another like deer in headlights moment. So that was a really fascinating episode of the type that doesn't happen frequently. And, given the tenor of things that were happening the past couple of years, particularly early last year, even before that, actually the past couple of years, I went ahead and just bought one of these physician tags on Amazon. And, this is a close up on the left side here of the image I showed you during that protest, that Black Lives Matter protest. So give you a sense for what this did. At least it gave people a chance to figure out, save us both the sort of unpleasant interaction of discovering that, oh, yeah, you're not whoever I thought you were. You're a neurosurgeon. So, with that, we're running out of time. Homer Adolphe Plessis is another Black man with a French name. He's actually of Haitian heritage, and he was what we call an octoroon. Okay, so this is of the famous Plessis versus Ferguson case, and Plessis grew up in an environment where before the federal troops left the Confederacy, it was becoming common to have interracial marriages and integrated education, and a society that seemed to be moving towards being integrated. Yet, the Plessis versus Ferguson case, which you can Google and learn about, is the one that legalized segregation and did so until the mid-1950s and 60s, until finally it was overturned by Brown versus Board of Education. But a question I'll ask if you're not aware is, when was Plessis pardoned? When did the state of Louisiana pardon Plessis for this wrongful conviction? Okay, so give that a thought. And that's just more of a factual question. The answer is last month. This just happened. Louisiana governor pardoned Homer Plessis posthumously 125 years after the separate but equal ruling. Okay, so this is a picture of my wife and me. And every June 12th, we remember this date in 1967 when our marriage became legal, because it would not have been legal had this not happened at a time when, it was 55 years ago. So like a lot of people are still alive when this happened. So, we're thankful that was a sign of progress, and my kids certainly, are, lucky that they were born into a country that is making this kind of progress. And also they were born into an era where the US president actually gave us a very concrete, official person for them to relate their racial background to in this kind of messy racial space in the United States. So there are signs of progress, and yet we have a long way to go, as everyone, watching this is well aware. Okay, so I'll finish this with a couple of comments about my work as the co-founder and president of the Society of Haitian Neuroscientists. And the idea of this effort was to, I know what Haitians do. So I thought there have to be so many Haitian neurosurgeons and other Haitian neurospecialists in medicine, basic science, translational science. Why not bring them all together? And I'm talking about the Haitian diaspora, and I unite them, particularly in an increasingly virtual world, unite them in an effort to actually reverse the impact of brain drain. And that was the idea. And, so some colleagues and I, friends and colleagues and I got started, and we built this, and we currently have 85 members spread around the world, mostly in the US, representing all specialties across the neurosciences, really. And our mission is to promote the basic clinical and translational neurosciences in Haiti by the creation of the conditions necessary for their advancement, to enhance and advocate for the neurological and mental health of all Haitian communities, and to foster collaborations between Haitian neuroscientists. Okay, and that's our website. And we're a beautiful group. There's, we've come quite a way with these virtual meetings, and I think we're all anxious and very enthusiastic about the moment beyond the current pandemic when we'll be able to do the work that we've been doing in person. Okay, and so what my evolving practice, and a lot of it through SHN, but what it looks like as a global health neurosurgeon, is studying neurotrauma through this subspecialty fellowship I have the opportunity to do at UCSF, and the complementary health equity fellowship I'm doing at the Center for Health Equity in Surgery Anesthesia, also at UCSF. Doing research on things like the socioeconomics of access to neurosurgical care in the US, and the economic epidemiology of neurosurgical diseases in Haiti as part of the needs assessment for how we're going to advance neurosurgery there. And then practically building bi-directional peer mentoring in Haiti and working on capacity development there. I'm involved in some global health leadership, as you heard earlier, and a lot of student mentorship. Advocacy is also a very important component of the work that I do and will continue to do. And some of the work we've done at SHN include public statements on the human rights and health equity concerns in Haiti and Haitian migrant populations, work on diversity, decolonization articles that hopefully will be published soon. Some of them have been, and some of the other leadership roles that have been mentioned. So in conclusion, we're just at the end of the hour. I leave you with these questions. Did you learn something you didn't know before? I hope so. Or that you didn't know as well as you thought you might have. Were you entertained? I really hope that for some of this you laughed. There's a lot of heavy stuff, I think, in this presentation. Third, have you been challenged to expand beyond your comfort zone? I think this is really important for any kind of progress, any kind of transformative work. It challenges us to stretch beyond what we're used to. And that's usually not a comfortable process, and yet it's necessary for authentic growth and transformation. And finally, are you inspired to Google, read, talk, or tweet more about something in this talk or something that comes up for you as a result of this talk? Okay, so I actually have a lot of sources here, but that was a selected bibliography. Thank you very much. Happy to continue this offline. So you can follow me on social media if you're not already. And my email address is right there for you. And thank you very much for attending and for your attention. And in our last minute, I'll take whatever we can fit in. Thank you.
I want to exert my privilege as moderator to fit something in. Something you brought up fascinated me, and that was about Ben Carson, because it struck me that it takes quite a bit of bravery again for you as a person to say, yeah, this is, I don't agree with him on this, and he was an important figure in what he said to me. And holding that opposite, I really appreciate that. It struck a chord with me.
Thank you, Lawrence.
We're seeing applause. People more than one thing. We're at the hour. I want to thank you so much for being here. It's really such a privilege to have you here. I feel my life is improved by knowing you. And I think all of us are. So thank you so much for your openness and for being who you are, because I think you're someone who's really making a difference in the world, and it's much appreciated. Thank you.
My pleasure, Lawrence. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.